Hello, everyone, and welcome to l'École, the School of Jewelry Arts. We're very delighted to have you tonight. Well, for us in Paris, this is tonight. We should say good morning, good afternoon, depending on you are today. But we're very delighted to have you for this first series this month of online live conversations, Jewels of the Renaissance, between power, culture, and refinement. Quite an interesting title because we're going to see that this very important moment was in 2 centuries approximately a key period in time where jewelry has been developed in a great way, when the owners, the princes, the kings, the queens would wear jewels. And we're also going to talk about some pieces that existed in the past, but that would be quite of bizarre for us even today, because very different from the jewels we're used to wear in the present days. So with no further notice, let's start immediately with the program that we're going to explain today and the 3 chapters that will be important in the presentation. Chapter 1, feeling like in a new world, we're going to understand the context, because jewelry or the arts, they always have been connected with the political, economical, cultural context when they were produced. And that's very important to relate it with the great courts of the time, the great discoveries, the new science, and the new world in particular, because that will be connected. So we're going to explain it in the first chapter. On the second chapter, we'll relate jewelry with clothes, with costume. And we'll understand how the contrast and the refinement of the jewels with the wearing was very specific at the time. Last but not least, the third chapter was about images and of culture and power, because jewelry is meaningful and it's significant to really understand how the jewels would mean something and would reflect some messages that, in particular, the court of the time would like to reflect. So that's the program for today. And let's start immediately with the first question. What is a Renaissance jewel?
Well, this is quite a huge question, because when we were discussing about the way to starting this conversation, we were wondering how to start. And then we were asking ourselves with Ghislain, why not trying to give you some characteristics, the main characteristics of what is a Renaissance jewel. And here you have in front of you 2 paintings, well, 1 jewel and 1 painting that can reflect perfectly the two main types of Renaissance jewels. At first, on the right side, you have a painting, and it's also to pay tribute to one of the most renowned artists of the Renaissance that we have chosen this painting in particular. You have a painting that was realized by Leonardo da Vinci, the great Italian artist, who was considered at the time, and even today, still today, is considered as like the archetype of the man of the Renaissance, because he was an artist. He was a scientist, he was a thinker, he was a sculptor, he was a painter, he was an inventor also. And here he has represented a lady from Mantoue, Mantoue being a city located in Italy. And then later, during the 19th century, this portrait would be re-entitled as La Belle Ferronnière, which means in French, the beautiful ferronnière. And what is a ferronnière? The ferronnière, actually, this is the small medal she's wearing around her head. And actually, this is just a very small medal that is tied up with a string. And here you have a very small metal tips in which has been set a precious gemstone. So this one seems a bit green or red. And this jewel is so small, it's very small, but actually it gave its name to the painting itself. So it shows you how important was this jewel, and how it's also very specific from the time period that we are going to see in the next few minutes. So you have this type of jewel, very important, but also you have the other type, and this is the one you can see on the left side of the screen. You have here in front of you what may be considered as the the main type of Renaissance jewel. You have at first in its form a pendant. We will see during the next few minutes that the pendant was the most common type of Renaissance jewel. Also the figure. You have the figure of a small Cupid. So we have some first ideas about the inspirations. Here it's the antiquity. Cupid, this little small Cupid is holding his bow and is about to shoot his arrows, which means that it's a jewel which has a main symbol, which is love. You also have some techniques that have been used for this jewel. You have enameling. It also gives you some clues about the techniques used during this time period. You also have different types of gemstones. Some are red, some are also green, and they are also cut in very specific ways. So you can see here some very specific types of cuts that were used during this time period, more especially the table cuts. So we will see that all those characteristics are fundamental for in order to try to define what is a Renaissance jewel, and we will see that during the first chapter also.
To complement this very specific definition, we're going to enter in the first chapter immediately and understand what was this new world. And weirdly enough, I would say, it's a new world, but using the past as a main inspiration. The word Renaissance comes from the French Renaissance, which means rebirth. But what is going to be reborn? It's the ancient productions. Antiquity, Greek and Roman antiquity, was the major source of inspiration. People were organizing excavations, trying to find sculptures, objects, reading the text from the famous writers in Latin and in Greek at the time. And they will try to make them have such a revival. And that's the meaning of Renaissance. It's antiquity revival. And what they would do is taking the inspiration, but also taking actual pieces that they can find from collections. And if you look at the lady on the left-hand side, painted by Sandro Botticelli, the great Florence painter of the late 15th century, you can really see a portrait of a very elegant lady. Her name was Simonetta Vespucci. She was a great woman of the time. She was at the court of the Medici family, one of the most powerful family of collectors and rulers in Italy at the time. She was probably a lover of one of the members of the Medici family, but she was also considered, and this is just very important, the most beautiful woman of the world. So that's quite something. With pale skin, beautiful blonde hair, blonde red, I'd say, with pearls twisting in the curve, as you can see. And she wears a very elegant outfit, but right on the neck, you can see there's a medallion. If you get closer, you will really see there's onto this medallion a decoration which looks like a relief from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. This is a cameo. A cameo, it's an ancient technique that has been developed by the Greek and the Roman in majority. And the technique is the art of cutting and engraving some specific gemstones. These gemstones were called hard stones. They were not so hard, but that was the name we used to call these ornamental stones. That's the name we use today. Agate, sarduan, sardonyx, onyx, and other stones of this very same large family. And these stones, they had a particularity. They had layers of color. So the more you were engraving, the more you would dig out and obtain the color in the back. And this is what you have. If you look at this particular cameo, in the front, it's white, in the back, it's black. And you really have this contrast of color, which looks like a relief of a Roman sarcophagus or a decoration. This cameo represents a mythological scene, so a legend from the ancient Greece and the ancient Rome. It's Apollo and Marsyas, so it's a faun. It's a legend of a musical competition. But what's important is this particular cameo was in the collection of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who was the main ruler and collector of the Medici family by the late 1400s. And that's absolutely important to see in here that this beautiful woman embodies this idea of the ancients. If we look at the other image facing her, we're not in Italy or in the German lands. And these German territories were the one of the Holy German Roman Empire, to be exact. This artist depicts in the center a medallion, which could be enamel, which could be carved as a cameo. We don't precisely know, whatever. What's important is the representation of Poseidon, Neptune, the god of the sea, the god of the ocean, that would be powerful over the sea. And all around, you have the very same decoration that, Cécile, you mentioned when we were looking at the Cupid pendant right before. You really have this decoration of gold all around, and you have these table cut gemstones and pearls pending. So all these characteristics are elements you're going to see very often, and you're going to see whether we are in Germany there or whether we are in Florence. Why? Because people were spreading out the same taste all over Europe.
So how would they do that during that time period? Actually, there is one day that you should probably remember when we will be done for tonight. It's 1453. In 1453, you had a great invention and innovation technique that would change everything in the field of arts. Actually, you had the invention of the printing press, which means automatically that before that time, you only had one copy, one design of something. And then since 1453, you would have copies of designs. And this is what we wanted to show you thanks to these two beautiful designs. So one is in color and the other one is in black and white. And it doesn't really matter because if we look to the one on the left side, we can see that there are some very specificities that are also common to the other one. On the left side, you have also a pendant, which, as I mentioned it earlier, it's the most common jewel of the Renaissance. And you also have a great work in gold. This is a work in volume. So you have the goldsmith's work, which is very present. You also have lots of precious gemstones. Some are green, cut in cabochon form, so which means round table. You also have red gemstones, so we will see which kind of gemstones it might have been during this time. You also can see a white one, which is probably a diamond. You also have this very typical pearl from that time hanging like a pendant, which has the form of a pill-shaped pearl. You also have some clues about all the techniques that have been used in order to give the colors to this jewel. So here we can see also the use of the art of the enameling. And then on the right side, we can see the colors. What a shame, but we can probably guess that you also have the art of enameling. You have the use of precious gemstones, colored ones, green, red, and even diamond. We also have our typical pearl from the Renaissance. But the main difference between these two beautiful designs is that one has been created in Italy and the other one has been created in Germany, which means that in two different European courts, you have the same kind of designs. And it was made possible thanks to the new use of the printing press. So during that time, during the Renaissance, we would have a sort of homogenization of the taste. The taste will become the same in all the European continents. And we have the same taste, the same use of techniques, and we will have also the same motifs.
Absolutely. What's important to see is that the motifs of the time would be equivalent wherever you are in Europe. And these motifs could be divided in two very different categories. One of the motifs is one that would be related to the ancient, and the other one, what we're going to see, is related to the art of traveling, we could say. Let's look specifically at a portrait of a Venetian lady. This aristocrat was called La Belle Nanny. It's in the Louvre Museum's collection. And you can see she is the perfect noble woman, elegant, with a beautiful dress, with the ornaments on the sleeves, well sewn. You can see the shoulders with the gold ornaments with pearls pending, a beautiful necklace of pearls around the neck. And the point of the corsage going down is also decorated with a sort of golden face, making a mimic and having some little pearls pending also. all these elements, you will find the very same motif, as Cécile mentioned, traveling in all over Europe, but find back in the jewels that could be worn. If you look at the two medallions, one has been produced, the other one is just a project. But what's interesting is that you can compare with the figure of the Belle Nanny. On the left, you have an ensemble of little figures that will be dancing, mimicking, playing. They look like a little ridiculous, and they're called grotesque. The word grotesque has been used to qualify something pretty much bizarre, pretty much odd, but it was used back then to mention every object found in the grotta. It means the caves in Italian, because people were digging out, excavating, and when they were digging, finding archaeological evidences like temples, like villas of the emperors, palaces, they would find these motifs. So they will take out these motifs from what they called caves, and they will call them grotesque. So this is the ancients. The other motif, which is in the center, is a mixture of line intertwined together. And these lines will be called sometimes arabesque from Arab or Moresque from the Moor. We're talking about the inspiration from the Arabian lands or the Turkish lands. And that's very important because Venice was the gateway to the East. And the enemy, but also the commercial partner of Venice, was the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, in 1453, the very same date Cécile mentioned about the creation of the printing press, you actually had the fall of Constantinopolis and the ending of the Byzantine Empire. So the Ottoman Empire would lead this access to the East, and people will, of course, be both fascinated and afraid, and will copy the very same motif, the one you can see on the medallion and the one you can see on the sleeves of the Belle Nanny. So all these things proves that even if people were, like in the past, using the motifs, these motifs were traveling and taking inspiration from faraway places.
Inspiration from faraway places, right? And it was a time, the Renaissance, during when people, well, I mean, European people, they were quite fascinated by exotic cultures, faraway places. So they will try also to find some new ways to reach Asia because of the fall of Constantinople in Turkey and to the Ottoman people, by the Ottoman people. And so they would launch great maritime expeditions. And here we can see how this idea of great expedition might have inspired the jewelry world. You have an engraving on which is represented a cosmographer working in his cabinet. The cosmography is the study of the universe and all its components. So you have lots of tools. You have a compass, you have a square, you also have a lodestone in the bottom part of the engraving. And we can see also in the back of the engraving, we can see a landscape. So we can distinguish the sea with a vessel on it, shipping. And we can see also that there is hanging huge model of a huge vessel. During that time, the people, they used to ship on what we call the caravel. The caravel was this huge vessel that was invented at the very late time during the Middle Ages. And this is this kind of ship that was used during that time to launch the great expeditions. And we can see the parallel that can be made between this model in the engraving and the jewel that was creating during the very same time, during the 16th century. So this is a pendant, again, the same type of jewel. It's about this size, I say. It's kept in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. And it's quite fascinating because we can see always the same main techniques that have been used in order to create this very precious jewel. But we can also see that there is a huge weight of a very precious stone, the green one, which were emerald. And on this pendant, more very specifically, you have at least, I'd say, 190 carats of emeralds.
Quite something.
Quite something. One carat being 0.2 grams. So it gives you an idea of the weight of this very fascinating pendant. And where did the emerald come at during that time?
Well, it's the New World. The New World was actually the new resource for the people. And we can really say that the conquerors, they were finding these new routes because they wanted new materials. And finding the New World was an access to absolute materials we're going to define together right after. But let's talk about some of the great explorers of the time. The one that gave his name to the continent, America, was Italian, Amerigo Vespucci. Here you have on the left a picture, painting representing Christopher Columbus. And Columbus gave his name to Colombia. And this is exactly where the emerald came from. What we know is these emeralds, as emeralds existed before, and there were some sources to find the emeralds. But with the discovery of mines, Muzo, then Chivor, that would be the first mines known by the Spanish conquerors, they will actually have access not only of quality of emeralds, but also of quantity of emeralds. And lots of emeralds would be found. And rough emeralds is normally of an hexagonal shape, which is exactly what you have on the watch, which is carved in the natural prism, the crystal of the emerald. What's fascinating is that this piece has been cut like if they were just cutting a slice of it. Well, I'm saying it like if it was easy. It was very hard to produce, but you would just imagine they cut the top to create the lid and to be able to open and close and have inside the watch mechanism made out of gold and enameling. You can, if you close the watch, you can read the time watching through it. So it's absolutely fascinating. And this piece has been rediscovered in London, believe it or not, by the very beginning of the 20th century. Right before the First World War, there were people in the city of London, which is very well known for the financial buildings today. And there were people just making some new buildings, and they discovered a treasure called the Cheapside Hoard because it was the neighbor of Cheapside. And this hoard, this treasure, had hundreds of uncut gems, jewels of the late 16th century and early 17th century. An absolute treasure that was just fascinating. And this fabulous watch was in it. It was between 4 to 2 centimeters to give you an idea of the dimension. So it's pocket watch. It's wearable, I would say. We would all love to have it. And this piece is now in the Museum of London, but it's one of the rare evidences of the Renaissance pieces that for most of them have disappeared with the time. And this proves that an object probably mounted with the golden enameling in Paris with Colombian emeralds has been found in London, and it proves the international aspect of the time and how traveling was not a problem for people.
Not at all. And we have emeralds coming from Colombia, but we also had lots of supply networks that were created by the European people. So we were mentioning the new way to reach Asia just before. And we have also the way to go to Colombia, so through the Atlantic Ocean, thanks to Christophe Colomb. But we also had the new way to reach Asia. And it was made possible in 1498 by also a Portuguese one. It was named Vasco da Gama. And in 1498, Vasco da Gama managed to bypass the Cape of Good Hope located in South Africa. So it allowed the European people to have a new access to Asia and more specifically to India. Why India? Because in India, since the 8th century before Christ here, you had diamonds, and it was the only one source in the world of diamonds. Before that time, before the late 15th century, diamonds, they would transit be imported to Europe thanks to the very ancient Silk Road. But since then, since the 1498, diamonds would transit to Europe thanks to the new maritime way. So we would find diamonds in India. We would also find lots of different precious gemstones, sapphires from Ceylon. We would also find red gemstones, and I say red because during that time we didn't make any difference between spinel, what we would call today spinels, and rubies. everything that was red was considered as rubies. So you'll have red gemstones. You will also have lots of pearls. We have seen lots of beautiful jewels, and you remember surely that you always have during the Renaissance a pearl that is hanging as a pendant and at the bottom part of the jewel. So we will have lots of pearl coming from this region of the world, but also from other places, like here in located nearby India, but also in America, in Central America. And we will also have lots of ornamental stones, like you mentioned, lapis lazuli. Hard stones, turquoise, are also coming from the Asian continent, so pearls coming from the central part of the Americas. And we will also find, European people would also find lots of precious metal, like silver in Mexico, but also gold in Peru. And all the conquistadors, they would use all this material, whether they were precious or less precious ones, and they would bring them back to Europe. That would allow all the artisans to create some very beautiful jewels.
And this is how they would have all the the materials accessible to really be able to make something new, and all these jewels we're going to mention. If we consider the profession of the jeweler at the time, the exact word should be the goldsmith. He was the man, mostly a man working on precious metals, gold and silver, and mounting, setting some of the precious stones. We have the chance to have an engraving by Etienne Delaune, a French artist, who would depict the reality of a workshop of the time. And what is fantastic is that it looks like a picture taken if we were there by the 16th century. And this very workshop looks very much like a present day workshop. Well, the costumes will be very different and some of the tools could have changed. However, mostly the work in progress will be the same. What we know is that it was always an education from master, an old master, to the youngest apprentice. And the apprenticeship would need that all the generations will be together in the workshop. Right in the center, you can see on the working bench, you have the old master working on a piece of jewelry. And there's a leather skin to recuperate all the powder from the precious metal or the stones that could fall. And working just precisely on his piece. Right in front of him, another apprentice or worker is also producing something. There's a younger boy on the left-hand side that is just working on the threads of gold, elongating them with this other working bench. And on the right, someone next to the fire, to the oven, is probably working the metal with hot temperature, but you can really work it cold with a hammer, or really hot, cooling it and casting it if possible. All these things were done by daytime, so you would use the natural light, which is possible with a huge window, which is the back side of this particular illustration. If you look at the goldsmith representation on the right, you really see that the profession of goldsmith slash jeweler was very important at the time, and they will acquire a higher status. Here you have Wenzel Jamnitzer. If you're not familiar with Renaissance period, maybe you have never heard of him. If you are, as we are, both Cécile and I, huge fan of this time, Jamnitzer is like a superstar, we can say, of the great jewelers. He was a superstar for the German territories, as Cellini was the one for the Italian, and we're going to talk about Cellini right after. But look at him. He wears a very serious black outfit, and all in front of him is present to actually show how important as an artist he was, not as just a craftsman. He was like an artist, proving with the sculpture, the tools, the book, the element. He was part of this humanism, this idea that he was making things and producing things.
You've mentioned the idea of humanism, so this is a very good transition to the second chapter. Well done, Gisela.
Thanks.
We are going to talk about the link between jewelry and costume, because during that time, and it's very well from you to have mentioned it, during that time you had this new idea of placing the human being in front of the scene. And because during the Middle Ages, God was was at the center of the mind. It was the main representation for people. And during the Renaissance, the people, they were starting thinking that they could express their own personality. And how to do that? Through your appearance. And what's the appearance? The costume related to the idea of jewelry. And this is why we had from this time the idea of jewelry set that appeared. And if we can define what's a jewelry set, we should say that this is a number of jewels that were created and intended to be worn all together. So having a look on this very beautiful portrait of the Queen of France, Elizabeth of Austria, she is wearing quite a rich dress. This is the court costume that probably were not very comfortable for her to wear. But what's very important is to have a look on all the jewels that she is wearing, because they were all created to be worn together. So let's have a look on them. At first, we probably have to mention that you should know that during that time, all the sleeves, they were separated from the rest of the body dress. So at first you have a first type of jewel. Here, this is all the small metal tips located on her shoulder. Actually, it was related to strings that helped the sleeve to be attached to the rest of the body of the dress. So we have a first type of jewels that are worn by the queen here. If we have a closer look to the head of the queen, we will see that she's wearing a very specific head ornament. It's a head ornament that is wrapping around her head, like twisting around her head, and it's called a tourette. Tourette in French, it's mean making a tour, if I may say. And you can see that it's completely related first with the hairstyle of the queen. And we can see that it's made of pearls, beautiful pearls, and during that time we only had natural ones. I think it's very important to also to mention that. And you can see that all the way that the metal has been worked here is the same way for the small metal tips that were located on the shoulders of the queen. So you can see that you have different type of gemstones. So you can see green ones and red ones cut in a very specific way in table. This is the table cuts. If we go a bit down, we will see that she's wearing around her neck a very tight necklace. It was called a carcan. French, in English, a carcan means a straight jacket. So it's completely related also with this idea of high-lace color. So which means that the queen probably couldn't move very much. If you go a bit down again, we will see that she's also wearing another type of jewel on her chest. She's wearing at the bust level a very long line of jewel that extends down with a very long line also of jewel, which is composed of a very huge jewel made of lots of gold, lots of metal, working in volume. You also have this typical common pearl hanging like a pendant. And you have to know that it goes all the way down to the tips of the feet, which means that it's like an armor, actually.
It was sort of a protection, chainmail, yeah.
So we had all this idea of jewelry sets. So we have seen very, unusual type of jewels here, but you should also know that we had more usual one, like the pendant. And the pendant, if you were able during that time to wear it like a pendant, the people, they would also wear it in more unusual way. At first, on the left-hand side of the screen, you have this portrait that represents Christine de Lorraine. And Christine de Lorraine, she's also wearing the high lace color, following the Spanish fashion that was in great vogue during that time. She's also wearing her carcan, necklace composed of pearls with different, very numerous rows. But she's also wearing a pendant on her shoulder, which was quite unusual during that time. So on the shoulder, but also on the back. And this is what's represented on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that this lady, who has been represented during a ball at the court of the Valois, so which was the dynasty of the King of France, she has been wearing, she has been represented from the back. She's sitting on a chair, and we can see that on her back she has a ribbon on which is hanging a different type of pendant. So you had some very unusual ways to wear the jewels, but you also, the people, they were also able to wear lots of rings.
Absolutely. If the pendant is probably the first jewel to keep in mind for Renaissance time, the ring will be just immediately the second. And to be honest with you, the ring is one of the very meaningful thing, but not only one ring, the more you were wearing a ring, the better, we could say. So people will have a lot of rings. And if you look at these portraits, you can really see how the rings would be present or would be at the very center of the piece. On the right-hand side, we're going to see a picture of a couple, I should say, in love, well, married, by the way. They're not smiling a lot. It was not common to be having a big smile, a happy face by the old portraits. However, what's nice is to really see that with this very black uniform and the huge chainmail of the man, it looks like a very wealthy couple. But if you get closer, you can really see there's a lot of diamonds, table-cut diamonds, properly put together to make this sort of geometric flower ring on the fourth finger of the left hand, probably an engagement ring. It's since the 15th century that the concept of engagement ring using diamonds was invented. So it's very new. And we know that it's only since the 14th, 15th century that we properly know that we need a diamond to cut a diamond. So it's one of the new discoveries to introduce these diamonds very much in some of the pieces. If we look at the lady on the left, she's alone, but not her rings. There are many, as you can see, and almost all the fingers can be blessed by the ring, I could say. Not the middle finger, which pointing up the middle finger would be an insulting gesture. So people would refuse to have them. However, all the other fingers would wear the rings in a different way. And sometimes even the middle of each finger, you can have accumulating, like stacking lots of fingers, lots of rings together on the finger and really wearing it in a different way to prove different meanings, but also to prove you were a very wealthy condition, wealthy status. These rings will have multiple uses and they will prove something about the person. They are identity revealer, I could say. On the right-hand side, you're going to see a picture of a ring wearing the coat of arms of Mary Stuart, the legendary queen. She was Queen of France, then she would become Queen of Scotland. And sorry, I'm spoiling you for the ending if you don't know her story, but she would be beheaded by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Well, that's the story, to make the long story short. It gives this idea on the ring of her personal identity, which she could press on the wax of a letter to print her signature. So it's a very symbolic, meaningful object. On the left, you have a skull ring. It's called memento mori. It could be for mourning, someone would have died, but it could also be an object to say, in Latin, memento mori, which means remember, you're going to die. So it's not something horrible. It's not something bad and evil to use it. It's something to reveal that life is short, that we have to enjoy the day-to-day, carpe diem, enjoy your day, because we don't know where it's going to stop. And that's the meaning of such piece. And in the middle, it proves that a ring could be very functional. It's a sundial, so you can read probably the time using the sun. We all know what a sundial, but on a ring, it's quite rare, and that's something absolutely original, because we've been talking about little watches in just before, and it proves that the way to measure the time was something very important for the people in terms of science, in terms of new technology, and they would like to wear it as, if I can say so, a gadget of the time. If we go further, there's a trend that was absolutely important back then. It's the trend for cameo. We've been talking about cameos before a lot, but this is here how we can prove that cameos were very important for them. If they had actual ancient cameos, or if they had revival of the antiquity cameos. They could just all bring them together and wear them together. And if the cameos were broken, no problem. They can fix it and have something different, invent something different. Let's have a look at 3 different cameos. The cameo on the left, as you can see, has been broken, cut in half, probably broken when it was discovered or broken in the past, ancient past. And the artist decided to complete the second half that disappeared. And for this, he ended the face of the goddess of the harvest with gold. And because the natural layers of the cameo of the stone had some layers of orangish brown and darker brown, he used enameling to complete the oval shape and have the natural shape recreated. In the center, you have a nymph, a water goddess. She has been sculpted, carved in a shell. So it's kind of cheating with reality. You're using the shell and then you're putting it on another stone and having something that looks like an ancient cameo. And on the right, this is, I could say, the very mishmash of the creation of the time. It is, if I can say this French word, a giant bricolage. People will just put things together, put gold, put fragments of modern cameos, and put a circle representing Venus in little of an ancient cameo to create a bigger sculpture of Mars and Venus, male and female together. There's this idea of combining the symbols together. This piece, the Italian called it commesso, and it's a mixture of all the techniques together, which proves that innovation and inventing new things was a key word for the Renaissance jewelers.
Invention, and you were also mentioning that the jewel, they had very specific symbolic meanings. And you also have jewels that were created in order to protect as talismans for the people. And this is the point here with this type of jewel, very curious. I mean, it was very specific from that time also. It's called a pomander. So this is this piece of jewelry with this round form. And you can see on the painting that this very adorable child, it's Clarissa Strozzi. So she's an Italian and she has been represented here. She must have been around 3 years of age. And she's wearing this belt on which is hanging a very long chain. And at the very end of the chain, you can recognize the same type of jewel with this round form. Actually, it was not a very type of jewel. Actually, it was made in order to protect the young child, because actually this pomander, it's called also a naple of sense. It could opens up in sections. Actually, it's like a melon, and each section were filled with some different types of fragrances, whether they were organic ones or not. And all those fragrances, they were very specific in order to protect the people from the disease and so on, because it was a time, the Renaissance, during when you had lots of disease, lots of people were dying quite at young ages. And unfortunately, this child also, because she died at the age of 4. So you had this idea also that the jewel is made in order to protect the people.
Even if, unfortunately, it did not protect her and she passed away. Let's move on to another representation to stay with hygiene and this idea of being clean and protected from the disease, with a portrait of a man, Anton Fugger. He was a banker, sorry. He was one of the most important provider of finances for the Emperor of Germany, the Emperor of the German Roman Empire, to be exact. He was like the Rothschild of the time, if we can compare. Very austere black color for the outfit, serious man. And there is something I really love, which is right in the middle. This little stick has below sort of a pointy part, and at the top left of it, if you can see the detail, it looks like a little spoon. If you can imagine what it was used, you cannot figure out there was an actual jewel. And we have found a jewel that looks like it in the Museum of Renaissance in Écouen, which is a castle in the north of Paris, with a beautiful national museum. And that is a toothpick and an ear pick or ear cleaner. Yeah, believe it or not, I love this piece. And probably functional for real, we can think. The pointy part was used to clean, of course, the teeth, and the little mini curve would be used to clean properly the ears. That's quite odd to wear such piece back in the time. But imagine you are Anton Fugger. You are one of the most powerful bankers of Europe at the time. And you wear a single jewel right in the center. You wear something that proves you are a man who is taking care of him. You are clean, which means your business is clean. So you can trust me. That's the meaning. You can trust the bank of the Fugger. And that's probably the reason of it that proves how meaningful were the jewels at the time. Let's stay with the meanings and move on to power.
Power and culture. And well, during the Renaissance, we have seen lots of meanings for the jewels. There were protections, there were symbols of love, there were also symbols of clean person, clean people, but they were also, first of all, symbols of power. And who were the people who were wearing these types of jewel? Well, the kings.
Of course.
So let's start in England with, we love this portrait, this painting with Ghislain, with the King of England, Henry VIII. Here we have in all its components, this painting represents the power of the king, is authority, is how rich he was. At first, we have the stature of the king. We have the feeling that the painter, it was complicated for the painter to represent all the stature in the frame of the painting. Well, it was quite large in reality.
He was massive. Yeah.
He was massive. He is also standing very proudly with the hand on his hip. His eyes is fixing the viewer, which is also a symbol of authority. Well, if we look at the jewels themselves, we will see that is wearing lots of jewels. At first, he is wearing a hat on which have been put lots of medals. We can count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 jewels, 7 medals, which is quite a huge number. He is also wearing lots of small metal tips on the sleeves. We can see that he is wearing rings also, probably with very specific meanings. We can see that we also have a clue about the military power of the king. On the very bottom part of the painting, we can distinguish the pommel of the sword. And we also have this very large necklace going from one shoulder to another, very rich, made of gold, on which have been set lots of precious gemstones. And here, the idea, the aim of the painter and of the king was to represent the power of the king, how powerful he was. And this is a key point during that time.
Yes, indeed. These large necklaces would be a symbol of these groups of people coming all together. And we're going to talk about some of the kings that would have pretty much the same stature as you mentioned. Henry VIII is one of the major figures of the Renaissance. There would be Francis I, in French we should say François I, who was the French king, and there was Charles V. Charles V was King of Spain and Emperor of the Holy German Roman Empire. To be exact, he had 17 crowns as a prince, as a king, as an emperor on his head. So controlling a vast territory and being with Francis I and Henry VIII, the major figures in the mid-16th century. To be sure to keep the power, he wanted to have the warriors, the knights around him, being possible to trust them and being allied with them to make sure in military occasion they will have their support. And he developed what all the kings would use, this idea of regrouping the warriors with an order of chivalry. And the famous order of chivalry that was used by the Habsburg dynasty was the Golden Fleece. And you're going to see the portrait of Charles V wearing this Golden Fleece. And you have an example of an actual one earlier, I should say, than Charles V, but in Vienna, so one of the capitals with Madrid of Charles V, and which proves that with this order of chivalry, these people would be recognizable, would be together. You can imagine that a French king would be jealous, and the princes were rival, weren't they? And The French would create the Order of Saint Michael. The Archangel Michael, slaying the dragon, killing the demon, would be in the center of the medallion. And all the people from the highest administration, the great well-born people, as they were called, the great aristocrats with military power, would be around the king, having the very same thing. And you can see with Charles II of Amboise, this figure of the medallion with the conch shells around, symbols of pilgrimage, to prove these religious symbols to gather the people properly around a king, around a sovereign.
Religious symbols, and you are very good in transitions tonight.
Am I?
Yeah, let's talk about the spiritual power also, because the religious people, they would also use the jewel as a thing in order to symbol their power. And here we are just seeing a portrait representing the Pope Clement the Seventh. And Clement the Seventh was renowned for being a great patron of artists, and he has supported lots of them, including an Italian one that you already have mentioned earlier. He was named Benvenuto Cellini, and Benvenuto Cellini was entrusted for the realization of a cloak clasp. Unfortunately, this one doesn't exist anymore, and this is the reason why we only have this, well, beautiful design in front of us. The real one was actually melted at the very late end of the 18th century in order to pay a ransom to Napoleon I from France.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, but we have here, thanks to this design, we have here an idea of how it could have looked like during that time. And here we can see all the main components of a Renaissance jewel applied to the idea of the spiritual power. And it's very interesting because we have then this cloak clasp that was used in order to close the very large toga of the Pope. And we can see, well, one that might be clearly the same than the one we have represented on the right-hand side of the screen. So we have a piece made of gold on which have been set lots of precious gemstones. So we have blue ones cut in tables, also red ones. In the center, we have probably a diamond. And we also have this motif of God giving his blessing. There is a very specific symbolic meaning with that. God related to the diamond, God with the diamond in the center of the piece, the diamond being the gemstones of the gods since very ancient times. So we have all those clues, all these symbols that have been put all together in order to symbolize the idea of the spiritual power.
We've been talking about king's power, spiritual power. Let's move on to queens, because the female power was very important, and their authority. There are lots of great queens that were ruling in the Renaissance, but their importance was absolutely present in lots of courts, in particular patroning the arts, and in particular ruling with the jewels. And I think we cannot present something on a Renaissance jewel without talking about Elizabeth I, the great Virgin Queen, as she was called. If we look at her portrait, we can see how completely covered with jewels and pearls she is. A huge amount of pearls. We call them bush of pearls. These bushes of pearls were making like she was a tree covered with pearls. If we get closer, you can really see how all these pearls with the lace and the ermine, the animal, were just proving this symbolic virginity. I'm saying symbolic because she had lovers, but she refused to be married because she would be the queen. She would not give the power of a king to her husband. So that's why she refused it. And you can see lots of gold. These gold were very precious to prove she was a wealthy woman. She was a very important figure. And right in the center, some red stones. This time we know these are spinels and not rubies. These three spinels were called the three brothers. They belong to the old court of Burgundy, the center of France, and they moved by different steps to the collection of the British monarchy, and we don't know where they are today. They disappeared, maybe recut. That's unfortunate also. But it proves that the kings and queens of Europe were treasuring some of the pieces and controlling them, because having jewels was really a question of power.
question of power, and the idea was also to try to give a perennial value to all those jewels. And this is what Francis I, King of France, wanted to do in 1530 when he created the collection of the French crown jewels, constituted at first by 8 jewels that were put all together. And all those jewels, they were actually not owned by the king himself, but by the crown. And this is the main difference between these 2 points. And unfortunately, today we don't have all the 8 jewels that were part of this first collection. We have here an engraving that represents one of them, a spinel, again, which was named the Côte de Bretagne. And the spinel, we do still have it today in the Louvre Museum, but in another form, because it was recut during the 18th century in the form of a dragon. And it was also set on the Golden Fleece. And it was part of this huge collection. Yes, here you can see how it looks like today. And it's kept in the Louvre Museum. So having created this collection that were then enriched by all the successive kings and sovereigns of France, they were trying to express the longevity of power. And during the Renaissance, it was also a great idea so that lots of kings that during the later centuries, especially during the 17th century, would try to also to express.
This period, because we have to conclude on something, has been for about 2 centuries a key moment of development for the jewelry arts to become. And this is how we're going to make the transition with the 17th century and this notion of a modern high jewelry.
What could happen? So we have been talking about lots of things during the past hour. We have been talking about how the new way to import precious things in Europe have influenced a lot the jewelry arts. So it would go on and go on during the late centuries, during the 17th century, and it means also that you would have lots of technical innovations, especially in the way of cutting the stones. And this is the main point that appeared that happened during the 17th century. You have an example on the left-hand side of the screen of a typical jewel from the 17th century. It's completely different with everything that we have been seeing during the past hour. Well, the metal here has nearly completely disappeared, because what were the superstars of the century? Well, the gemstones, because they were cut in new ways. This is the period during when what we call the rose cut, more especially for the diamonds appeared. So it meant that people were able to put more brilliance in the stones, so they were able to enhance the beauty of the stones. And this is the key point between that, the main difference between what we called bijouterie in French and the jewelry. And this is what happened during the 17th century.
Which led us with this idea of a beautiful golden age in a certain way. Golden not for the absolute creation, but gold because the metal was present absolutely. On the 15th and 16th century, this Renaissance period was sort of a transition in a way between the old age of the Middle Ages, renewing with the past and being able to prepare what would become modernity in a certain way. This fascination for Renaissance, we have a revival back in the 19th century. There will be lots of people making what we call neo-Renaissance, so Renaissance revival, using the past motif in portraits, in creations, to create things, sometimes to make some fakes. That's a terrible reality that museums have to face, because lots of copies have been produced at the time, and the interest on Renaissance has been hugely studied, and it's still something which is done even today. We hope you enjoyed this moment, this hour we spent together, and we hope you obtain all the information you expected about this very specific moment in time. What we're going to do is to take some minutes with you to read your questions and, of course, as far as we can, answer them. Let me have a look. questions are arriving. There we are. Lots of them. Thank you very much for asking. The pendant on the side of the arm reminds me of an honorary type of symbol, if there's any relationship of that. The idea of wearing differently the jewels was particular of the Renaissance time, and we know that in occasions such as balls, the jewels would move with the people. So putting them in the back, in the front, on the side, etc., would be, of course, for casual reasons to prove probably a personality, but could also reflect some military symbols. And we know that there's a museum, the Legion of Honor Museum in Paris, where there are lots of medals that were used all around. It could be such reflection. Here, in this occasion, it was a woman's type of wearing, so having not such military medals. However, it could be the inspiration. We unfortunately have no text to say precisely that we have something to say it's inspired, but we can definitely say, as we know, the wearing looks like an armor, that probably the military symbols could reflect such fashion.
The same question again.
Okay, great.
No more. Comment about the ring. Which one?
Oh, Mary. Okay, it was the question about Mary's Stuart, I guess. Who would wear it? Well, someone who would, okay. Option one, someone who would be at the court of Mary Stuart and as a courtier receiving it and proving that the Queen had the reason to be faithful towards him. Option two, it was someone who would be at the court and would like to attract the attention of a queen. That's also a possibility. Option three, it could be a lady of honor of the Queen who would be able to receive the letters, print for her. Could be the Queen herself. We have no proof of it, but lots of people could have it. We know that these rings could be given as presents to reward someone of honor. We know her enemy, Elizabeth I, did this, giving lots of jewels to her lovers / courtiers, and this would be very important to reveal the connection in between the king, the queen, and the people at the court. Other questions are coming.
About rings? It's for you, the ring.
You leave me the rings.
The middle finger. Why not wearing rings and the middle finger? There is a negative aspect of wearing a ring in the middle finger still today.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not doing it on camera for sure, but pointing up, of course, the middle finger would be very insulting. So people would normally, that's one interpretation, I should say, would normally not put on the wooden finger, whether they would put on the pointer to really point something to prove power.
It's related to the next question.
And that's the next question.
Index.
The index would say, I have the power, I point. Henry VIII did so.
We have seen Henry VIII. He was wearing rings on the index fingers. And it was also a symbol of authority. And it's very interesting because we still have the same meanings today.
True. Having a finger of one part of one thing would not mean the same thing. But since the 1970s, 1980s, I mean, recently, we can put rings on middle finger, and I know it for sure. And there's nothing insulting. I do have a crown. That's the king's figure inspiring me. Okay, is there another question? Lots of questions about rings. We don't know exactly the meaning on which finger would represent which thing. What we know is that besides the middle finger, the thumb, the pinky, the ring finger, they will all have rings and many together. And that would not be a problem because people would just sort of a protection, like if it was a glove, it's just protecting their hands and proving that's an interpretation. But I've read it several times on books. If you have lots of rings, it proves you're not a worker, you're not using your hands to work, so you were in the higher status, in the higher society.
I can see a question about the other stones. I have showed you a list of gemstones coming from some faraway places all over the world, thanks to the new a way to reach Asia. It was just a list. So you have to keep in mind that having this new way to reach Asia and the other parts of the world helped the European people to have lots of precious gemstones. And so we had diamonds, we had emeralds, but we also have had lots of other precious type of gemstones. I'm just thinking about the garnets coming from
True.
also the same part of the world. So it would also help the European artisans to create new types of jewels and more. Lots of new
many more, yes, indeed. The Middle Ages had some stones that were more local, if I could say. The garnets is a great example that you mentioned. But now what was really new is, as you explained it perfectly, is the quantity and from all over the world, thanks to these new routes. And that's how the context is important to understand the jewelry trades of the time, is that the jewels were from faraway places, but that was not something to block them. It just attract them and transport them because it was a resource of wealth for the countries. The kids' pendants. Oh, questions about some of our very specific jewels that we have seen. Do they store medicine, and how does it protect them?
I think it was part of all those beliefs that we had during that time. It was quite very specific. I think that it was not new, this idea of wearing protective jewels, because during the Middle Ages also you have lots of very specific beliefs that, I mean, well, we could give you lots of examples, but it was part of this feeling that the jewel and what it contains also can protect you from the death.
Absolutely, with amuletic power, the material used, the shape used, the symbols put in it is, and as you said, it's not new. Since humanity is humanity, when they adorned the body, they wanted to protect, in particular, the kids. And we know we have a specific class on amulets, talismans at the school. 80% of the jewels in history, particularly in the past, have been produced to protect children who, unfortunately, many of them passed away when they were very young. In particular, for these pendants, they had some fragrances, as you said. And I've read someday that the idea of the fragrance was smelling good, and they thought the disease will just go away.
And also bad, and this is the reason why they were wearing them, quite far away from the face. True. Because it didn't smell very good, actually.
Yeah,
so it was just in order to protect you.
You remember all the different slices? You had mixture of strong perfumes, strong fragrances. So better having them below, as you said. Other questions are coming.
Yeah.
Okay. How many years would you say does the Renaissance period extends over? Well, to be exact is always tricky.
Yeah.
It's about a century and a half, 2 centuries?
Yeah, 2 centuries, I'd say. From the middle 15th century to the very beginning of the 17th century. It depends on in what country you are, actually.
True.
In France, we consider that it ends with the death of the French king Henry IV, so 1610. But in some other places, they would consider that around 5 years, more or less, before or after. True. It would end. What's very interesting is that the period that comes after the Renaissance, it's not a very small period. It's all the modern times, actually.
Yeah. What is interesting is the experts would never be agree, and that's always something which is interesting. You talk about the ending of the Renaissance. Even the beginning is sometimes a problem for the specialists. And once again, you perfectly said, depending on the country where you're from, the Italian, not to say from Florence, but in particular, would say that in 1401, you had a competition in between artists for the baptistery in front of the Cathedral of Florence, the Duomo. If you've been to Florence, you know this beautiful area. If you've not, whenever we can travel again, I really invite you to get there. There was a goldsmith competition. That's very important. And in 1401, they left Middle Ages and they entered Renaissance. Some other historian will say it's 1453, the printing press, the
Fall of
the conquest, the fall of Constantinople.
For some other, this is Christophe Colomb, 1492, discovering the America. So, well, you have plenty of dates that are considered by people.
Well, considering the time, one more question, and then we'll have to be over. Can you mention some books about medieval? Well, we were already going to talk about this. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Luca Esposito, for this great transition you offered us. Go ahead, please.
So I always mention what we consider as a Bible for this topic of the Renaissance jewel. You can recognize the Queen of France, Elizabeth of Austria, and here you'll have, well, everything that we have been talking about during the past hour. So you'll have the context, you'll have the different types of jewels, you'll have the different European courts, you'll have the way of cutting gemstones. So I would say that this book, which is quite huge and also heavy, would help you to know everything about the Renaissance.
As a complement, we've put around us some books, in particular on the typology of jewels, because some of the jewels would be typically on certain objects that were not very commonly often to see in the past or more future periods. In this particular one, there are lots of things on the pendants.
The pendants through the idea of portraits, how to represent the people, what were the main symbols, how to represent them, which stones were used also. So this is a great book, but it doesn't deals with only the Renaissance period.
True. What we've been using is using books, I'm sorry, on typology. So we've been using here about the pendants, one other on the rings. So there are many more you can find. Considering we're speaking in English, this book has been written by the great jewelry historian from the UK, Diana Scarisbrick. So this one exists in English. It's Bijoux à portrait, portrait jewels. And you really have some of the beautiful cameo medallions, other examples we've been mentioning. On the rings, I know there's a V&A, a Victorian Albert Museum edition specifically on ring that does exist. And of course, families.
Yes,
great
because
course.
we had traveled throughout the European continents. We have been talking about lots of dynasties, and so we have been talking about Henry VIII. So he was part of the great families of the Tudors. And here you also have lots of great images, illustrations about the family, the way the jewels were worn during that time. And it's very interesting to see how the jewels also influenced them.
True.
And it's very interesting. Yeah.
All the great families, the Valois for France, the Habsburg for both Spain and the German lands, the Medici for Florence have been very much documented. There are lots of exhibitions on the Medici in various languages. This one is from the Teian Art Museum in Tokyo. So that's in Japanese. We don't pretend we're able to read Japanese, but there's an English information by the ending, a beautiful iconography. But there was also an exhibition in a French museum in Paris about the Medici, and all documentation you can find in the museums in Florence, because the Medici dynasty has given most of its collection to the museums of the city of Florence. So all the information are there about them.
Well, thank you very much for all your comments and questions. We had a blast, I can say. Thank you, Ghislain, very much for the past hour. We must conclude now. Well, but we love here at L'École to go further with you. So if you have any more questions and comments, you should see on the screen the address of the social medias at L'École. So please, if you have any questions, please ask them on the platform, and we would be delighted to answer you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and see you soon.